Welcome to the 805 Living Eats podcast from 805 Living Magazine. I'm your host and food writer for the magazine, Jaime Lewis. For the September 2020 issue of 805 Living, I traveled to sunny Ojai to meet with Chef Ariane Aumont, whose catering company, Le Picnic, focuses primarily on outdoor dining in and around the Ojai Valley. Ariane started out as a private chef almost immediately after graduating high school, and her work took her to destinations across the globe where she'd pick up spices to bring home. 6 years ago, she left the traveling chef gig behind to open Le Picnic and planned to have her busiest season ever this past spring. The spoiler is, of course, coronavirus. With a cleared calendar, Ariane decided to clean out her spice drawer and ended up organizing her spices into a beautiful textural color wheel image that you can find in the feature I wrote about her for 805 Living Magazine this month. She spoke with me about her inspiration for the wheel, how she became a chef, and why she chose Ojai for her life and business. Ariane Aumont, I'm so glad to be here in Ojai, looking out over the swimming pool and the beautiful Tuscan Ojai landscape. I wanted to ask you a little bit about this feature that we're doing together for 805 Living that has a real spice. That's the foundation of the story. So I wanted to kind of get a background on that and ask you where did you grow up? What was growing up like for you?
Absolutely, and welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to Ojai. So nice to have you. So I grew up in Los Angeles until I was 12 years old. I was in LA and then moved up to the Santa Ynez Valley, the wine country north of Santa Barbara, and grew up in a very food-centric household, or rather two households. So I lived with my mother and stepfather in Los Angeles, and my mother is Black, my stepfather is Mexican-American, and so the food was primarily soul food and Mexican food. And then also lived with my father and stepmother, who are both French. So there was a lot of Provençal style cooking happening in that household. And at a very young age, became obsessed with food. Like had a subscription to Bon Appetit magazine when I was like 8 years old. And while our kids were playing outside, I was like flipping through the magazines, just looking at photos of food, like, and cookbooks. Like I loved thinking about food.
Sorry to interrupt, but it also sounds like, as you're talking about picturing food, it sounds like it's also very visual for you.
Yeah, very visual. Have always loved the arts and creating visual art and pairing food with that love for just beautiful presentation and vibrant colors and textures has been a huge part of the way that I cook and the food that I love.
So when you graduated high school, what happened?
I graduated high school and moved to Santa Barbara and started working in a kitchen at a restaurant called Citronelle, which at the time was one of the high-end restaurants of Santa Barbara. It was a chef named Michel Richard. His restaurant, his main restaurant was in DC, but his other sister restaurant was the one in Santa Barbara. And I was just kind of a prep cook at the time. And from there, miraculously landed a job as a private chef as an 18-year-old with very little experience in professional kitchens, but growing up, my role in the household was cooking. It was my chore of choice. So I cooked for the whole family. I had 4 younger siblings, have 4 younger siblings, and loved preparing food for the family. So cooking privately for another family felt second nature, although it was a major learning experience.
I'm sure it was. And is this in I'm picturing it for some reason like on a galley, on a yacht or something in the Mediterranean. Was it in a home?
It was in a massive home Yeah, in Montecito. And every night I was cooking for a minimum of, I think, 15 people. Wow. Because there was it was like a revolving door of guests.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of cooking, and yeah, I don't know how I managed.
Did you have a staff?
No, I didn't have any staff. There was plenty of staff working in the household, but I didn't have a sous chef at the time.
18 years old.
Yeah. So I did that, and then after a year, decided to fulfill a dream of traveling the world. And I did that for a year. And during the world trip, realized that I wanted to go to culinary school and have more of a formal education, so I didn't feel like an imposter. Yeah. And yeah, went to culinary school at the Cordon Bleu in San Francisco.
You have moved so much. I mean, you've seen so much.
There was a lot of movement in my early 20s.
Yeah. But it all led to, ultimately having private clients.
Yep.
Traveling a lot.
A lot of traveling. A lot of working for high-profile clients. I was so lucky. Out of culinary school, I was lucky enough to land a job with one high-profile client, and then word spread, and so my clientele base ended up being, kind of like LA's Rich and Famous, which was very cool.
Yeah.
And intense.
I know. I'm like dying to know who, and I know you signed disclosures. Someday, I'll give you a cocktail and I'll make you.
All right.
So as it relates to the spices that we're featuring for 805 Living, so many of them are things that would be unfamiliar to the average, home cook.
Yeah.
So did you gather those from your travels? Your understanding of them? Would you try something on a dish? And
yeah, absolutely. I would travel a lot between my personal travels or traveling with clients, and would go, for example, in Turkey or Morocco, would get lost in the souks and just spend days exploring spices, and would bring home a little packet, and then play around and see how I could incorporate it into, the food that I was cooking.
Yeah. And I know that you spent a lot of time in Provence. I don't know, did you spend time in Provence as a child also?
Mostly on the island of Corsica, which is off the coast of France and Italy. And then, time in Provence as well. Mostly the south of France.
Okay.
Where I have a lot of relatives, and such incredible food.
Well, and I'm thinking about, I have this picture from, my husband and I did a year abroad also where we quit our jobs and traveled, and some of my favorite time was spent in Aix and Arles, and there's this picture of me with all the spices at a market behind me, and just pots and pots and pots, and there's that connection between the south of France and Morocco and Tunisia, and so there's an overlap there for sure, and spices are everything to Provençal food. Yeah.
And more herbs. It's funny, I feel like when I think of Provence, it's a lot of herbe de Provence, dried herb blends. And then once, you head south towards North Africa, that's where you find, these spires or these cones of turmeric and saffron, and the spices I feel really become prominent south of France.
And so the blends that you offer in the pages for September, I know that you have I think it's Ras Al Hanout.
Yeah, Ras Al Hanout makes its way into my cooking quite frequently.
So explain what that is.
So it translates, well, I always thought it translated to like some version of everything but the kitchen sink, which is, I don't know, I must have fabricated that at some point. But it actually translates to top shelf, and spice markets in Morocco or spice market owners would create their own blends, their own Ras Al Hanout blends based on what they have on their top shelves.
So it constantly changes.
Yeah, constantly changes, or rather every spice vendor has their own version of their Ras Al Hanout. And the one that I included for 805 Living is my go-to. Mm-hmm. It's a simplified version because Ras Al Hanout can have up to like 16 plus ingredients. The one that I added maybe has, I don't know, 8. Yeah. A little bit more accessible for the home cook.
Yeah, really.
But still so flavorful and unique, and a really nice addition to a pantry because you can make the blend and then just store it in an airtight jar, and anytime you're roasting a chicken or grilling vegetables, you can use a couple of spoons to enhance the dish.
Yeah, and that I think is a good reflection of your style in that it is, I mean, a little bit of this, a little bit of that taste, we decide, but not something like concretely.
No, it all starts with what's in season and inspiring, and then from there will be some other influences, the ethnic influences. But I generally cook so that the ingredients are the star of the show, the produce, the meat. And yeah, Ras Al Hanout's a fun one to give it a little pizzazz.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Who has been an inspiration for you in terms of how they, well, gosh, I mean, big question, but how they cook, but also maybe even how they live their life with food?
Well, my I guess I would say step-grandmother in Corsica is the first person that comes to mind. Her and my step-grandfather live on a farm in Corsica and grow all of their own vegetables. He hunts. She will cure the meats. They're making cheese. They're making olive oil. And as a kid, going there every summer and witnessing her process in the kitchen definitely informed the way that I cook. Although she wouldn't really let me in the kitchen. It wasn't the kind of grandmother dynamic where, she's explaining her method or letting me taste as she goes. It was like, stay out of the kitchen while I'm cooking for the family. But you can watch. Just don't ask questions.
Yeah, watch from the doorway.
Yeah, so I would watch from the doorway in awe. And, there were really sweet moments where she would harvest a ton of green beans, and we would, sit with little, opinel knives and cut off the ends of the green beans. And it was truly a farm-to-table experience. And growing up in urban Los Angeles, that wasn't something that one normally would have access to.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
And so when we've talked before, your style, you've said, is the seasonal, the abundant seasonal produce and proteins, but then with like the seasoning is a huge thread through that.
Yeah. Seasoning, method, and all stemming from what I'm craving. It's like,
that's good to know.
And I have phases. There might be my North African phase, and then I'll eat something, I don't even know. I've literally had every kind of phase. There was a Korean moment, Vietnamese. Right now I'm revisiting my Japanese phase. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to go back to Japanese cuisine.
Yeah,
often.
For its simplicity and its exacting.
Simplicity, for the intentionality of the preparation of the food, for how it's so refined. Yeah.
And they're pretty uncompromising.
Exactly.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Which is great. Tell me a little bit about Le Picnic, how that started.
Sure. So after over almost a decade, a little longer, of working as a private chef and traveling a lot, constantly on the move, I was ready to settle down and plant some roots and get a dog and maybe have a garden, and Los Angeles had been my hub throughout my 20s, because that's where a lot of my clients lived primarily, and then I would travel with them to their other residences. And yeah, I was just ready to leave the city and came up to Ojai, where I had cooked 15 years prior for a client, and fell in love with this valley, and was also ready to phase out of private cooking and wanted to create a catering company. And so Le Picnic was birthed in Ojai, and I guess was created based on the landscape. It isn't primarily a picnic company. A lot of people think that that's my shtick, is that I do picnics or picnic baskets, which I do create on occasion, but it's more of a full service catering company, but with a focus on dining in beautiful settings.
Yeah. Which there are so many.
Yeah, which there's so many venues in Ojai, and they're all so special. The weather's always incredible. And yeah, so Le Picnic is kind of my my Ojai inspiration.
Yeah. And what year did you start that? Had to have been kind of recent. Not recent, but in the past 5.
Le Picnic was, I guess, it was end of 2017.
Okay.
What year are we in?
Newish.
Yeah.
And successful, it sounds like.
It's been great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so lucky to have to live in this little valley and yet be as busy and have such great people coming here and hiring us for their events.
Yeah.
From all over. We have people reach out from literally all over the world. I always wonder how they find me, but yeah, they're coming to Ojai for a weekend or for a few weeks, and we'll look to Le Picnic to cook at least one of those meals while they're here, which is awesome.
And why wouldn't they? It's awesome. Well, thank you for inviting me in.
Of course.
And talking about spices, which is such a treat.
Sure. My pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this installment of the 805 Living Eats podcast. For other episodes featuring conversations with chefs across the Central Coast, or to see the most recent issue of the magazine, head to 805living.com. 805 Living Eats is a production of 805 Living Magazine and is edited by Chris Lambert. Until next time, I'm Jaime Lewis.